I think about the tarot as sort of like this Rosetta Stone of spirituality that really I am able to understand because of Pamela Colman Smith, because of the way that her art brings in astrology, numerology, alchemy, nature. There's just so much that you can layer on top.
Is there anything more misunderstood in history than magic? Here's what your history classes conveniently skipped. The world was not built by logic and reason alone. It was built by something much more ancient.
The Hidden History of Magic tells the true stories of the astrologer in the White House, the intuitive who sat alongside Gilded Age tycoons, and the black ops government agencies that have used mediums to talk to aliens since the 30s.
These moments often get covered up, sidelined, or buried because they prove something. Magic is not fringe. It's used every day.
Because while we've been trained to trust everything but our own intuition, the people in power never stop consulting the stars. They know something we've been taught to forget. Magic is real, and we have access to it.
I'm Rhiannon Hauk.
And I'm Erin Bagwell.
We are psychics, witches, mothers, and storytellers ready to break down history's best-kept secrets.
Welcome to the Hidden History of Magic.
Today on the show, we are talking about the esoteric artist behind the most famous tarot deck in the world, Pamela Colman Smith.
We discuss the mystery surrounding her identity, her famous salon parties, and how she used folklore, mythology, and music to inspire her work. Atima, welcome to the Hidden History of Magic.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Atima and I go a little bit back in that we used to teach a tarot workshop back in the day for my Substack, Under the Moon Gate, and for Atima's, all of her collectives. And so it's so exciting to be able to bring you to the show and to dive into tarot. For the Hidden History of Magic listeners who don't know, Atima Louie is a tarot reader, a teacher, and the founder of Tarot for Black Folks, an online community that teaches Black folks how to connect with their ancestors by reading the tarot cards. Well, Atima, today we're talking about Pamela Colman Smith, who is our iconic illustrator of the tarot deck. What was your first kind of introduction to Pamela? When did you kind of hear about her first?
So when I first started learning tarot, I was obsessed. And I had I think it's called the Wild Unknown Tarot by Karen.
Great deck.
Yes, that was my first deck. And I was reading from it and I was posting about it on Instagram and I was just like doing collective readings. It just felt like coming home to myself. And a friend who's a tarot reader was seeing my stories and my posts and was like, you need to get the Rider-Waite deck. You need to get And it's like, okay, sure. So I got the deck from US Game Systems, and I'm so glad that I did because it really started me on the path of really understanding the roots of the tarot. And she let me know, this friend, she said, it's called the Rider-Waite deck, but Pamela Colman Smith is the artist. And of course, this woman is overlooked in the naming of the deck, right? So is history. So that was the first time I was introduced to her. I was taught by this friend that her signature is in the corner of the cards. And so I'm so glad that I got that early intro to her in my study of tarot.
I love it. I think it would be helpful, Rhiannon, for us to kind of ground our tarot experience. What was your intro to tarot before we dive into Pamela?
Yes. So when I was 14 years old, I had a Renaissance fair for my English class and world history class. And so I wanted to go as a fortune teller. And so one of my friends had an old fortune teller magazine and it taught you how to read cards. But I learned on poker cards because there was no metaphysical shop, or if there was, I wasn't allowed to go and know about it in the small town where I grew up, but we played poker. So I had poker cards and learned how to read those. And so I did that. it was so fun, especially when stuff would come true that suddenly I was reading cards for everyone. And then there were ghosts in my house. And so my grandma was like, you brought the ghosts in with those cards, and like burned them. And it was a whole thing. And so then it took me a while to get back into it. I would always go to metaphysical shops and like look, but I don't think I got my first tarot deck until I was like 25 or something. Like I was much older. And I will say that it wasn't until I built an app for tarot reading that, or like an oracle card app, that I used the Rider-Waite-Smith deck as the foundation because it's public domain. And I learned the meanings of the cards through like writing the meanings of the cards over and over again in the app. And so I feel like it's only now that I really have a grasp on how to read tarot from that perspective, from that definition. But before that, it was a little more like I understood numerically what stuff meant because of the poker cards. And then it was more intuitive. What's your relationship?
Yeah, I feel like I have like the basic bitch version, which is that I was pregnant and I stumbled into a Barnes and Noble, and I'd always wanted to learn tarot, pick up a deck. And so I got an Art Nuevo deck, which I have. Actually, I'll show you two guys because it's like duct taped together. It's like falling apart, this old deck that I had.
Beautiful.
And I got a little book from Sky Alexander about like how to read the tarot. It really helped anchor my pregnancy and allow me to kind of ground into this new transition of my new identity as a mother. And then I've been really doing it ever since and kind of playing with it and understanding it. So it's interesting how the tarot finds us and then Pamela finds us. I like kind of the
Wait a minute.
Introduction.
Did either of you do tarot in the 1900s then?
I did not.
Mm-mm.
I feel very old.
You're our OG. Well, let's bring it back, Rhiannon. Let's go back to 1901. So shall we set the scene for our audience?
Yes, taking it back. The year is 1901, and Queen Victoria is dead. The frigid and conservative establishment is giving way to lighter colors, lace, and a less restrictive dress code people could buy off the rack. The world was changing, and technological advancements like electricity were introduced in London on street corners, but were not yet available in homes. Across the pond, U.S. President William McKinley is assassinated by an anarchist in Aaron's own Buffalo, New York.
Whoop, whoop.
Making way for my favorite president, Mr. Teddy Roosevelt, to usher in a progressive era in America.
Meanwhile, Pamela Colman Smith, a surrealist artist, was just initiated into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn by her friends W.B. Yeats, Bram Stoker, and Arthur Waite. This up-and-coming illustrator is about to be commissioned to work on one of the occult's most famous divination tools, the tarot deck. But in a tale as old as time, she's erased from the story. Where do we even begin with Pamela? I mean, she had a really interesting childhood. We should say she was born in London to American parents. So that's kind of already, she's a little bit fish out of water in that sense.
And an Aquarius. So even more fish out of water there.
Atima, are you an Aquarius?
Yes, I am an Aquarius.
Wow. I like the synchronicity there that we have our own Aquarian to like weigh in here. At 10 years old, she moves to Jamaica and her dad is helping build the railroad there. And this is kind of where we find our first mystery about Pamela Colman Smith because historians are not sure. Maybe there's speculation that her mother was maybe Black or that she had East Asian ancestry. There's kind of a little bit of smoke and mirrors around, like, do we know the history? It feels like we don't have enough evidence to be able to be decisive. But let me tell you, being Jamaican is a part of Pamela Colman Smith's identity and her storytelling moving forward in her career and her artistry.
Yes, her mother's Jamaican. Also, there is something about
we don't know if her mother's Jamaican.
Well, she's Jamaican. We don't know if she's Black.
Okay, so
here we go.
Let me weigh in.
Yes, please.
I think that she was not Black.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's this confusion because she was sort of like a cultural anthropologist in Jamaica, right? She published 2 books on Anansi stories, which are Jamaican folklore And she also put on plays with Jamaican folklore. So she absolutely contributed to the preservation of such important cultural Black things for sure. I think that the desire, and I've come across this even in my community tarot for Black folks, where people are like, oh, Pamela Colman Smith was Black. She was not. Her parents were white folks from the Northeast in the United States. You know, she was also, you can look up research and people consider her to be British because she spent so much of her time across the pond. I think that there is this association, which I don't think is bad, between like Black women and Black identity and magic. And there's just this, like, you know, we think about Black girl magic, right? Like,
Mm.
I think there's this cultural desire to associate her with Blackness because Blackness also is seen as really cool. And when you do look up photos of her, I can see how there would be some question around, oh, maybe she is mixed race and things like that. But I personally think it's very important to recognize that she was not Black and that she respectfully explored Black culture, respectfully preserved Black culture, or celebrated Black culture. And I think it's definitely in homage to her beautiful memory to recognize those things while also saying it was not in her lineage. So
It's giving a little Hilaria Baldwin, to be honest. Do you guys know her story where
Oh, Ilaria.
she's a white woman from Connecticut. Her parents lived in Spain for a while, and now she calls herself Hilaria. All her children have Spanish names. And I will
She
say
was
that
on TV once doing like a morning show. She's married to Alec Baldwin, is how she's famous. She used to teach like a little free yoga class in New York.
yes.
And in without an accent, and then suddenly showed up with an accent. And Ilaria, one time she was cooking and she's like, oh, I don't remember the word, cebolla. And they're like onion. And so she is like fully ESL, even though she only started really speaking Spanish in her 20s.
And it feels like Pamela Coleman Smith because sometimes she would slip into this character where then she would use, she would speak
Patois.
pidgin.
Yeah, like her writing. I found some of the pages of the books that she wrote where she is telling the Anansi stories and the other Jamaican folklore, which again is very important because at the time to get something published, sometimes it had to be done by certain people or what. Like she is preserving folklore and culture. She also did look ambiguous, and I think that she really leaned into that.
I think she leaned in. I think she wanted it to be a mystery. That's the energy that I got. And it felt like people were talking about it. There's like some writer who said that people were speculating, but that she liked kind of the mystery of being regarded as other, that was kind of part of her artist identity. So it feels like she maybe leaned in a little bit. And to her credit, she did move around all kinds of places. I mean, she was all over the place. She was in New York, she was in London, she was in Brooklyn. I mean, the fact that she went back and forth like 10 times in her 20s is crazy to me when they had to take a boat.
Well, and what's interesting is that she did look ambiguous. And so some of the ways, well, luckily we have the ways that people talked about her inappropriately. So we have Yates said that she looked Japanese. Irene Cooper Willis, author and barrister, described her as dear, funny, Chinese looking little artist and painter. And she often would, I mean, there's other slurs that people used for the Romani people to describe her. And so people always were commenting on how she was very dark and not thin. And when she smiled with a smile that was peculiarly infectious, her twinkling Romani, we're going to say Romani, eyes seemed to vanish altogether. And so there's something about I don't know, being ambiguous or being other also in Victorian England. Sometimes I wonder how much she leaned into it as a preservation method too, or as a way to, I don't know, these are people that she's welcoming into her home, doing these like beautiful salons, and it's like her artist community. And so when you're an outsider, when you don't exactly fit in anywhere, it's this thing where I'm mixed. I'm like very, very mixed in lots of ways. And also like, it's this weird thing where you straddle worlds. And sometimes it's like a weird dance because I don't know. I can get how she does it. It's also a weird thing between appropriation and appreciation. And I think that she leaned toward appreciation. She at least lived in Jamaica, or, like there was that going for her. But she also was just like an Aquarian weirdo.
I think
her
that
little
we know for
dresses.
sure from the history books.
Yes.
We can confirm that she was an Aquarian.
Yeah, for sure. This has me thinking because one of the things that I've seen a lot of Black witches talk about on social media is ancestral healing and connecting with our ancestors as a way of really growing our magical practice. And how there are like people in the white community who say, oh, like I can't do that. And it's like, no, no, you have ancestors too. And part of the history of the United States was whitewashing away your European ancestry, right? And so there is this like history, and I would even say reality of a lot of people of the white culture feeling like they might need to appropriate or fill in a spiritual hole because of the way that whiteness, which is a social construct, has separated them from their roots and their culture. So I'm thinking about that on one end, right? I'm like, okay, Pamela Colman Smith was, we believe this white woman who
and
was
upper class. So she was, which is very important because either way she's separated by class. Her grandfather was mayor of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sitting with that. And then I'm also sitting with myself, right? And how I am so attached to the tarot, which has its roots in Italy, right? Which is not at all from the African diaspora, right? Which is where my folks are from. My lineage is East Africa and then also the Southern United States, enslaved Africans as well. And so I'm like, okay, I also have appreciation for culture that does not necessarily come from my lineage, and I'm mixing that into my background too. So I'm just sitting with those things that she also probably sat with as well.
I also think there's something so important about storytelling and folklore. And we haven't mentioned it yet, but her friends used to call her Pixie. That was her nickname. And so she had kind of this whimsy character about her. People would describe her as kind of somebody who like walked out of a storybook. She was very bright-eyed and charming and a little bit impish in her like styles and mannerisms. And I would also imagine that it was so important for her to learn about the Jamaican folklore because it later kind of leads her back to Celtic storytelling, Scottish storytelling, and all of these kind of exist in a realm together, right? Of the supernatural and unseen realms. And so it does feel like it was a deeply important foundation for her in her understanding of not only kind of herself and I think how she viewed the world, but then later into the occult and maybe more magic as she expands and becomes a deeper artist, joins the Golden Dawn, those kinds of things too. So I like the idea, Atima, that like it's the story of something, it's the understanding of something, we're kind of using all these stories to build our own identities, right?
Absolutely. And also, if we just think about Hermeticism, I teach tarot in the Hermetic tradition. I was taught tarot by a master teacher, Ellen Goldberg, who teaches in the Hermetic tradition, truly things that have been passed down by the Golden Dawn. And the whole idea there is the law of correspondences, that there is the divine in everything. And so you really can, as I teach, like explore different cultures from around the world and different ways of understanding the divine, understanding magic, and they will correspond because they're ultimately getting to the truth of things, the truth of our universe. And so bringing things together. And then I think about the tarot as sort of like this Rosetta Stone of spirituality that really I am able to understand because of Pamela Colman Smith, because of the way that her art brings in astrology, numerology, alchemy, Greek and Roman mythology, nature. There's just so much that you can layer on top. Like, why restrict ourselves and just say, hey, only this culture is what I'm allowed to study? And she was looking across the world as a mystic, right?
Hi, Rhiannon here, just popping in to give you a spiritual tip that's going to enhance and elevate your life. A reading with my co-host, Erin Bagwell. Erin offers mediumship and psychic tarot readings that are perfect for checking in with your spirit guides, getting cosmic messages that apply to your life right now, and seeing who's supporting you on the other side. I personally have had the pleasure of experiencing a reading with Erin, and I was able to connect with my grandparents and my mom, and I got advice that has made it so much easier for me to navigate this chaotic world that we're living in today. You can book appointments right on her website or submit a digital question and get a response back in 48 hours. Check out erin-bagwell.com or click the link in the show notes below to get your reading with Erin today. Yeah, I will say that I believe that storytelling is the language of our soul. And I think that storytelling is the thing that makes us very human. There have been so many studies that show that we're hardwired to tell stories in our brain. I believe that we were telling stories before we even had language. I think that stories are very, very important to how we learn and experience the world and make sense and make meaning of the world. And I'm so obsessed with, for example, how Joseph Campbell, I have a huge crush on him. He spent his life academically studying mythology across the world, right? Across time and space, all of these myths. And this is how the hero's journey was born, because he found these common elements that show up across time and space. But what I'm obsessed with is that he was doing this very academic, secular pursuit almost of mythology and ended up becoming spiritual. It like cracked him open and he spent the rest of his life like, you got to follow your bliss. What did I learn from all these stories? Follow your bliss. We're meaning-making machines. And suddenly he's like not a philosopher, not an academic, but a spiritualist in a way. And I think that that's like the power of storytelling. And I think Pamela Colman Smith like really tapped into that, both in her interpretation of the tarot, but also just like in her interest in folklore and how much work she did related to folklore.
Definitely. We should also say that she got kind of a formal art education. She went to Pratt in New York City. She was there for 2 years and she leaves without graduating. There was some speculation. I don't know if you guys have heard this. Part of her leaving was perhaps when her mother passed, but then I also read another history account that said her mother passed when they were in Jamaica, that she died when she was much younger and it was actually her father who died. So there's some kind of confusion around kind of what broke her.
One of the histories that I saw is that it was when her mother died and her father was still around, because after she left Pratt, her dad took her to London and introduced her, like found a way to introduce her to Bram Stoker. And that's how she kind of got involved in that crowd, because Bram Stoker famously wrote Dracula. And he's like the vision of Dracula and vampires that we know today are kind of born from his stories. And she was looking for work as an illustrator. And so she would illustrate programs to promote his play or whatever he was touring at the time. And that introduction was made by her dad.
Yeah, she went on to illustrate his second book.
Yes.
And add some illustrations for that. So they worked together too. She had lots of very famous friends, lots of theater friends, people in the art scene. We alluded to it a little bit, but she would have these really beautiful gatherings, these salons where people would come and incense would be burning in the corner and they'd be drinking kind of this lemonade elixir mix that they had a fancy name for. They called it the Opal Hush, I believe.
Oh, fun. I love a good salon. Oh, I miss it so much.
We should bring back the salons.
Oh, yes. I used to have salons when I lived in LA. I love them so much. And to think of how like mystical, also, this is all happening in like La Belle Epoque. So in Paris at the time, the salons were all the rage too. And this is like pre-World War I Europe.
It's giving Andy Warhol in some ways.
Oh, he wishes. I mean, we should talk about how she, through her friend group, through Yeats, is introduced to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is a secret society. It's like definitively occult. It is, when you think of Wicca And I think a lot of people associate like witches with Wicca, which Wicca's like pretty new. But Wicca is kind of like born from, it's like in the lineage of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Like this predates Wicca, and it's a huge influence in ritual magic, I think, at this time.
And Arthur Edward Waite was writing a book called The Key to the Tarot, and he needed a deck to go along with the book. He was very drawn to Pamela Colman Smith's style. He felt she was very intuitive, very psychic as an artist. And so he commissioned her to do this deck.
Because they were pals in this secret society. Like this is, and again, you can't just knock on the door and be like, hey, I want to be in this, right? You had to be initiated and invited. The other thing that I think is really important to note, the reason why he could ask her is because this is a space, unlike the Freemasons, which were another secret society at the time, women were considered equal in this space.
That's awesome. I also heard that everybody who was in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn had to make a tarot deck, that was part of the process of like initiation and study, that they really believed the tarot was like a key basis of their practice.
Wow, that's so interesting.
How pissed would you be if you had to make a deck and then the deck that becomes the most famous deck of all time? Like everyone knows about it and no one has ever heard of your deck. Like, I need one too.
Well, I was going to say that makes sense because she very famously only worked on her deck for 6 months, which feels impossible. So it would make sense that maybe she had already had some drafts going before she like went to the drawing board and got everything printed for the most famous deck that we know now. Another kind of interesting fact is that Arthur was really interested in kind of the major arcana, that he really kind of had thoughts about how he wanted those to be illustrated, but the minor arcana were really left up to her. And I guess in the Italian, more traditional versions of the deck, we really just see the images as their suits. So wands, swords, cups, and pentacles were not illustrated with people. And she really took the liberty to kind of add the symbolism, all of the imagery, all of the nature. So she really gave it a different spin. And one of the fun facts that I learned was that she would put her friends in the deck. So there were a couple of her famous like actress and actor friends she would use as models. So if you kind of look at side by sides of some of her old cronies, you could see them, which I thought was kind of a cute little nod to her community.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so cool that she was that innovator to take the pip cards, as they're called, right? And actually put images along with them. And I'm so grateful she did. And I'm really grateful to my friend who told me to study her deck, because in my experience, pretty much every tarot deck I've ever bought has been an iteration of the Smith Rider-Waite, right? Like she, in so many ways, is the foremother and has inspired so many people, even in their creation of their own interpretation of the deck, with how they see things. So that's pretty magical.
Yeah. And I don't know how you read tarot, but for me, so much of my interpretation when I'm reading for someone is rooted in the imagery of the deck. So sure, this card means this thing, but there's this thing pulling my focus over here. And so I think that this is what it's really about. And to imagine that this deck was inspired by the Italian tarot deck, which at the time was like playing cards from the Renaissance. And it just so happened that this British museum had it on display the year before this work started. And so they would go and look at the Italian deck in the museum and get inspiration. So for example, the Three of Swords is the same in both the Italian deck and the Smith Rider-Waite. The thing about this Italian deck too, and I am so grateful again for her for illustrating the minor arcana, because they used to have to, can you imagine being like an interpreter and you just get like, Three of Swords or whatever, and you have to do a reading with just numbers and suit. Like, I'm sure we could get there, but
it's
like
tough. Yeah,
so
it's harder
helpful
to pull from. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting. I do have some people in my community who read from a traditional playing deck, right? And that really is, to your point, Rhiannon, a very different way of reading. It's like having this knowledge more of like the history of the card as opposed to what's the image that you're seeing. And I oftentimes get the question from potential students. They're like, okay, well, what's your philosophy, Atima? Is it that you teach people how to read intuitively, or you believe more in the traditional definition of the cards, right? And I think another way of looking at that is like intuitively, like looking at the image or the meaning of the card. And I truly believe intuition first, always.
Mm.
And I do teach a lot of history, but I say just learning about the history, learning some of the traditional meanings, and, what does the color gray mean in the tarot, for example? Learning these things just feeds your intuition and gives your intuition more things to pull off of. So I definitely like to do both for sure.
Oh,
I love
nice.
that. I think that is an important part of it because I think for me, speaking to the magic of it, it's about kind of what like that gut hit you get. I always tell people who are kind of at the start of their spiritual journey that tarot is such a beautiful gift you can give yourself because it gives you kind of this invitation to get to know yourself. And you really have to kind of trust the body, trust the cards, trust the process. My cousin has a deck and she was asking AI, what the meaning was. And I said, well, why don't you ask your body? If you want to change your life, you've got to actually do the work and feel it internal and get those emotional hits and feel the shiver on your back and have that connection, build a relationship with your cards. I feel very superstitious about like how I treat my cards, how I talk to them, where I put them. My daughters we have a deck in the kitchen and they'll like separate the cards. And I'm like, we got to keep everybody together. Like they want to be together. So I love, Atima, that you're doubling down on our thoughts and feelings about intuition because I think that that's an important part of the practice.
Absolutely. And I would say also because Pamela Colman Smith illustrated all of the cards, that is what empowers you to be able to just pick up a deck and start reading. In my classes, for example, like we'll have completely new people and we start reading the cards and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, just shuffle and just go for it. Like
Yeah.
you are ready, you are legit. And I think we have Pamela Colman to thank to make it
Mm.
so possible because as we were saying, if you're just seeing three clubs on a card, right? Like you're not necessarily going to be able to read intuitively. So very, very powerful.
I want to talk a little bit about her synesthesia, which is her ability to essentially listen to music and have it emotionally affect her in her painting. And she stated, when I take a brush in hand and the music begins, it is like unlocking the door into a beautiful country. And so music became a really big part of her, I think, channeling and psychic ability to be able to kind of create and move. And I wish we had a tarot playlist of like, this is the wands, this is the swords. It'd be so interesting to know kind of what inspired her as she was painting the deck.
So I am obsessed with synesthesia. I studied cognitive neuroscience in undergrad, and I think that there's like so much that we can learn about how the brain works through synesthesia. So just to set it up, what synesthesia is when two parts of the brain fire simultaneously. So there's all
Mm.
different kinds. One of the weirder ones is Tilda Swinton actually has this one where she tastes words, where it's like each words have a distinctive taste depending on what she's saying.
Mm.
Very common is letter color or number color. And so when people are like doing math in their head, for example, sometimes they'll see the color before they see the answer. And that is how they are able to like do math very quickly. Or another very common one is music color synesthesia, which a lot of artists have, a lot of musicians have. I think Pharrell Williams has
I think
synesthesia.
Beyonce has it also.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And I think that all babies are born with synesthesia, and because like everything's just firing all at once. And then through time, your brain prunes the different connections and you just experience things separately. I have one friend who has ticker tape synesthesia. So when people speak, she sees subtitles in
Wow.
her head of the words of what they're saying.
Huh.
And so, yes, it's really common in autism. I'm just going to throw that out there because of what we know about Miss Pamela Colman Smith being a very eccentric lady, obsessed with folklore and a synesthete. But what's interesting to me about her synesthesia too is that she doesn't have color music synesthesia like a lot of people who have music related synesthesia. Hers are landscapes. She sees
Yes.
full scenes and landscapes, which makes it really special. And sometimes I wonder how much of synesthesia too is like, so from a brain perspective, we know that it's two parts of the brain firing simultaneously. And I wonder how much of it too is from like a psychic perspective, where you're tapping into a broader sensation of something. And so I have synesthesia. And when I was obsessed with it, I didn't know it. It took me a while until I realized that not everyone experiences music as shapes. So for me, songs have very clear shapes. And someone asked me once, like, okay, I'm going to give you a song and then you tell me the shape. And there was a cover and the Stevie Wonder version was like circles. And then the Red Hot Chili Peppers version was angular. And so it's interesting because the same song, depending on the style of it, can have different feeling too. Now, Erin, you also revealed that you have synesthesia.
Well, I don't know. Doesn't everyone have some kind of like mental reaction to music? No? Atima?
Well, what I just started thinking about is just last weekend, I was teaching about the Judgment Tarot card, which has the angel Gabriel with the horn, and how it was one of the tenets of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn that sound was part of the spiritual experience, and that sound was specifically connected to liberation. So, and then also the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn assigned a tone to each one of the major arcana cards. So I teach that as well. So I definitely think that there is a way that sound and music transcends for everybody, but I wouldn't say that I have synesthesia. So I think it's interesting to hear about your experience, Rhiannon.
Oh, well, and I think it's one of those things where I don't have a mind's eye. I have a blind mind's eye, so I don't see. So, well, yet, yeah.
It's
sometimes
coming.
It's coming. We'll see. Stay tuned. So it took me a long time to realize, because people very vividly see these things, and I don't see it. I just feel it the same way that I do with like any psychic thing, where it just feels like a certain thing. But synesthesia was such an important part of her art, where her most popular exhibition was she listened to a bunch of classical music and just painted what she saw and sold out of every painting in the gallery. It was that gallery's most popular exhibition of all time. And Stieglitz, who was the gallery owner, was like, please do more, come back. And so her whole process was about turning on some music and letting the scenes show up. And her role as an artist, as an illustrator, was to capture what was happening in her mind.
There's also another quote that says, "There is a garden that I see often," this is from Pamela Colman Smith, "with moonlight glistening on the vine leaves and drooping roses with pale petals fluttering down, tall misty trees and a purple sky, and lovers wandering there. A drawing of a garden that I have shown to several people and asked them if they could play the music that I heard when I drew it. They have all, without any hesitation, played the same song. I don't know the name, but I know the music of that place." So she was also able to do it the opposite way, where she was able to show a painting and say, "What song is this?" And people would know, which feels crazy.
That kind of speaks to the idea that like maybe we all have a little bit of synesthesia. We're all tapping in, right? That collective unconscious space.
Hi, Erin here. If you've been loving the conversations we're having and you are curious about going deeper into your own story, I highly recommend booking a session with my co-host Rhiannon Hauk. Her soul session stories are unlike anything I've ever experienced. She guides you through your own inner world, helps you uncover patterns, connect the dots, and can actually shift what's been keeping you stuck. I had a reading with Rhiannon about a year ago, and honestly, I think about it all the time. I think of Rhiannon as kind of like the intuitive's intuitive, because she gives you not only a connection to your guides, but this beautiful cosmic blueprint that can really ground you and anchor you on your journey ahead. She also offers 15-minute intuitive sessions if you're looking for something quick and focused, as well as one-on-one mentorship for ongoing support. You can book with her at rhiannonismagic.com/connect or click the link in the show notes below. Trust me, you're going to love your reading with Rhiannon. Okay, now back to the show.
Well, and what is synesthesia versus just psychicness, right?
Yeah.
And how much of this is why I'm obsessed with synesthesia, is because how much of synesthesia is just proof that we're kind of tapping into the multi-dimensionality. So one of the things that I wrote my paper on is that we can understand how the brain works based on things that crossfire. And because of that, we know that there's a part of the brain specific to music. Because so many people have music synesthesia, we know that there's a part of the brain that's specific to that, which I think is fascinating. If you think about, like, why would our brain have a
whole
specific
piece for
area?
Music. That's so cool.
Yeah. If it's not just like like we don't have a part of our brain for like crocheting or what, you know what I mean? Like it is very specific to music. So I think it speaks to your point, Atima, that there is something about music and frequency being fundamental to existence that she's tapping into the greater part of it. And I don't know if she would identify as psychic.
Well, I was just going to say, Rhiannon, part of our researching with these gals in history is that we really want to dig into the mysticism, to the magic, to the psychic ability. It is so crazy to me that a woman who is part of the Golden Dawn, we have no real like information about her actual intuitive practice. And it feels like perhaps she liked kind of the cloak of mystery around her. But I could read 18 articles about synesthesia. Like, it's interesting how we believe in one thing, we're able to name and talk about one of it. But then this other piece of her is really hard to find. In fact, one of the only pieces of information I found, and we're skipping ahead a little bit, but we can go back and forth, is that at her house, when she ends up retiring kind of on the coast, that somebody found obelisks all around the property. And
very hermetic.
Yes, exactly. And that they believed that she had read tarot in her attic. That was like her kind of occult space. So those were just like teeny tiny little nuggets that I found on a blog of a woman who went there, who interviewed a grandfather who like lived next to. I mean, it was very, very hard to find kind of how magic showed up in this woman's life, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah. What's interesting.
Also the theme of the podcast.
Yeah. What's interesting about this too, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Atima, is that it is really hard to find out about her own magic, except that she was a member of this secret society, which is occult. And is occult mystic? We know that it's magic because they do literal magic. They have magic practices, but would she identify as psychic, for example, or a witch, for example? You know a lot about the Hermetic Order. So do you feel like they identified as magical people, or is it like religion where it's like a practice, a ritual, because one day I hope to be magic? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. My exposure to the Hermetic Order, I'm so grateful, is a really modern one, right? Like through oral tradition. And so my teacher, Ellen Goldberg, she also really takes to account the idea that the tarot is still growing, that it's this folk magic. And so you can apply any identity that speaks to you to this practice and to the Hermetic Order. So like, I absolutely love a lot of their teachings. And I also say that I identify as a witch. So, while I'm not necessarily like an official member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, since it's since been extinct, like, I don't think that we need to make separation, right, between like what you call yourself and if you believe in some of their teachings. Now, if we were to go back in history, I don't know. I do wonder how they would identify.
Yeah, because there's something about it being a divination tool, right? And we know that they are connecting to the divine, and we know that they're reading the cards. And so it's weird to me that the history is separating the magic from it. Still feels really secular in a way. Like I think that there are plenty of people who don't consider themselves psychic, who don't necessarily believe in psychic stuff, but will pull an oracle card for their day. You know what I mean? And so there's something really interesting about
But I would think if you were part of a secret society,
yeah,
you would take your practice pretty seriously.
They did literally do magic too.
Yeah, I feel like they were all, it feels like the secret part is what is blocking us from knowing the information. And I wonder how much of that is of her own doing by her own design. That's kind of what I keep coming back to, is that she liked living in the gray area and she liked living in the mystery. That was kind of part of her allure. But I will say this made me, and every woman I know, I need everybody to write a memoir. I need everyone to document to some extent, start a blog, post it on Twitter, because there are some questions I'm dying to know. And I do think if we don't want history to shape our story in a capitalistic, white supremacist way, we need to get the words on the page, because what we have learned from this show is even women who identify as mystics, their story gets really, really whitewashed.
Well, and I think it's a way to make sure that these powerful people aren't seen as kooky crazies. You know what I mean? Like Victoria Woodhull, for example, very openly was a medium, was a clairvoyant, made money as a clairvoyant. And people are like, she was probably just a prostitute, right? Because it would be crazy if she was a clairvoyant. But she ran for president. So let's make sure that everyone knows, you know what I mean? And I feel like Pamela Colman Smith, again, she's like eccentric. Like people are talking about the way that she dresses and how childlike she is. And she's like hanging out with all these like artists. And I mean, Yeats is a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Prize for literature. Like these are not like aspiring, like, oh, I wish one day someone will read my poem. No, like these are like famous people at the time too. And she's being kooky and herself around them. The other thing that we haven't even touched on is her sexuality was another thing that is kind of fluid and unknown and secretive, which I wonder also how much of this is because we're in Victorian England, which is, even though the Queen does magic herself, is still very quiet and very Christian and like Church of England Christian. Because even later in her life, she ends up converting to Catholicism, and that's still seen like eccentric and fringe and a little more mystical than Church of England.
Yeah, but I think to that point, I think that just really speaks to a part of her that appreciated the organization of the Golden Dawn, right? This idea that there were rituals as well, which is very interesting to me because I do enjoy learning, like, okay, this is how this thing works in this spiritual system. But then it's also very important to me to have my own intuitive practice, right? And just go off of what feels good to me, as you were saying, Erin, like in my body, right? So I feel like I'm always navigating. And I actually am on the leadership team of United Methodist Church. So, yeah, so I'm kind of like, okay.
She's a witch who can do it all, people.
Yeah, you can move through these different spaces and, we don't really know for sure. But I would say that in my heart, I feel like Pamela Colman Smith didn't necessarily like abandon her beliefs in tarot and in her more esoteric knowledge as well, even though she became Catholic in the end.
She still had those obelisks all over her property, so we know she was still dabbling in magical ritual practices. Something else that I want to state about the deck, I think people look at the publishing of the deck and they think, oh, it was a smash hit right away. It was not. It took many, many years for it to kind of come into popularity, and especially during World War II, there was a paper shortage, so a lot of books weren't being printed. They couldn't print decks. And so it really didn't become super popular until 1977. US Game Systems bought it, heralded by Stuart Kaplan. And that's the tarot we know today, where it became very mainstream, 100 million copies sold in circulation. So Pamela never got to see in her lifetime the success of the deck. It wasn't really until it came overseas that now you can get it in every country and everybody knows her work if they don't know her name.
Something that I think that Atima brought up earlier is that her signature, her monogram, is on the corner of every card. And what's really cool about it, the symbol, the first time I saw the symbol, I was like, whoa, what's that? I would get that tattooed on me. Like, it looks so cool. And then I found out it was her signature. It looks like a sigil.
Yes.
And I wonder how much magic is in that. You know what I mean?
I love that. The other kind of little note I wanted to make is that there was a Witchcraft Act of 1735 in London that they still enforce, which basically meant people couldn't practice magic and do magical things. And that was really enforced until the 1950s. So when we think about the Hermetic Order, when we think about tarot not really getting mainstream, people were still kind of carrying the wounds of the original witch wound of the burning times and what happened in the Middle Ages, where 500 to 800,000 women, sometimes whole villages, were burned at the stake. So we have kind of these inklings that are still kind of enacted today where it feels like the government's like, just don't talk about it. We're just not going to acknowledge it. And then I kind of went on this weird hunt about like laws about witchcraft. Did you guys know that Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Carolina, that fortune telling is strictly prohibited by the state?
Yes.
Still
Wild.
today.
Yes.
Wild. And then there are some other, Arkansas, your Mississippi, they have some regulations by the local government. It's, more a little bit open, a little not open. So I thought that was fascinating that in our year of Share 2026, that we're still kind of locking down the way that people are using divination tools, their spirituality. I mean, it's wild.
I think that there is something very scary for me. And again, I have trauma of being exercised as a teenager because I read poker cards. But there is also something about like moving from California to Georgia. Suddenly, I feel a little less comfortable dancing naked under the moon. Or, like there are certain things that I could absolutely do in LA that I feel scared to do in Georgia, not necessarily because it's against the law, but there are certain, I don't know, there's still certain pressures. And I can see how a secret society would feel like a safe space to go full weird. Because there are even certain things that I do that are full weird, that are not I wouldn't do it around anyone except for maybe my closest friends, because I'm like, it's too weird. It's too weird.
Yeah. And having that community is so important. Finding your people. And I'm really grateful to be living in the time of the internet, to be
Yes.
able to like be weird, but then find other weirdos, right? Just with like a Google search and with hashtags and things like that. And there are multiple people in the Tarot for Black folks community who are on the down low,
Mm-hmm.
part of the value of the community is they're like, oh, I can log into your school. It's on school and talk, and I can show up on Zoom and be in my closet, and I have my tarot deck hidden in this space, but this is my first time pulling with people, so having
Wow.
connection and that opportunity to be together is so important. And then, you also layer in like the history and the laws. And then also when I just think about the impact for people with Black lineage, whether it's colonized ancestors, as I do on my father's side, or enslaved ancestors, right? And the idea of like using Christianity as a weapon to justify slavery and things like that. So that way you end up thinking, oh, anything outside of Christianity or outside of this traditional religion is bad. Oh, it just breaks my heart because there's just so much juicy spiritual goodness that's out there waiting for us to discover it, right? And
Yeah. Well,
who we are.
yeah. And I think about, coming back to Pamela Colman Smith and her ethnic ambiguity. I'm Hispanic, which means that I am disconnected from the magic of my ancestors, right? Like that's just part of the history, is that through the church, like it was illegal to do it. You got thrown in boarding schools if you did it. If you spoke your original languages, like there's a history of violence, right? All across this country, across any place that has been colonized, right? Like we've been disconnected. And so there's something interesting too about the trauma of that is what makes it scary, right? That's why my grandmother is like, burn it in the fire. Like, don't do that. And also, there is a white woman so happy to do it instead, like to cosplay as like, oh, I was a Peruvian Quechuan shaman in a past life. I was a high priestess in Africa in a past life. And they are happily on the internet with 1 million TikTok followers. And so we need to do it. We need to like step into our own, reclaim our culture, because other people will happily do it,
That is such a good point. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Atima, I am obsessed with you. I really want you to write a book. I know I've messaged you this before, but I need you to write like a tarot memoir about just like everything, because I think your voice in this space is so important. And I don't know, I would just love to read it. So will you tell our audience where they can find you?
Yes. So you can find me at tarotforblackfolks.com. And that will send you to my school community. My community is exclusively for Black folks, where I feel called to support people. I also am on YouTube, Tarot for Black Folks, and anyone can see those videos. So you can find me in those 2 places.
Yeah, and follow Atima on Instagram as well.
Yeah. I have mostly my personal stuff on there, but it's open and you can just get to know me.
I love it. Well, Atima is going to be joining us for our bonus episode, so everyone can stay tuned to hear more about her story, and we're going to dive even deeper into the tarot. Atima, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Check out a sneak peek of our bonus episode dropping this Friday.
Have you guys ever made a tarot deck?
I am a tarot addict. When I log into my Muggle job, I pick that tarot card and put it on my desk.
I did a tarot reading for the Real Housewives of New Jersey.
Your deck learns how to speak to you.
So if you forget, you can always just look at the stars and they'll guide you back on the path. We can navigate ourselves.
I am shooketh. What the hell is that card?
Thank you so much for listening to The Hidden History of Magic. If you like the show, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. This show is produced by Rhiannon Hauk and Aaron Bagwell. A very special thanks to our patrons who make this podcast possible.
To join our coven of gorgeous witches, get bonus episodes, attend live events, and learn real magic inspired by each episode, join us on Patreon.
If you would like your own personal reading from Rhiannon or Aaron, check out our links in the show notes. Until next time.